Willkommen beim Nerds of Law Podcast. Die Nerds of Law, das sind Katharina Bissett und Michael Lanzinger. Wir präsentieren euch Neuigkeiten zu Recht und Technik, spannende Interviews sowie Tipps und Tricks generell zur geekigen Seite des Rechts. Denn vergesst nie, Law is the ultimate science.
Nerds of Law, Episode 23. Podcasting for Nerds, with Tim Morris. Welcome to today's Nerds of Law podcast. We are, as you can obviously hear, doing another English episode today, and we've even gone further afield this time, and we've invited I always, when I say very old friend of mine, makes it sound as if we're old, but we're not. A very long time friend of mine from the States, T. Morris. T is, well, a very long podcaster, publisher, social media guru, etc., etc., etc. And I think we've known each other for, well, pretty much as long as I podcast. So I think I've read your book first before I knew you. But
yeah, I did. Actually, I think you did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was like just a fangirl, and then I was like, yeah, I think it's really cool. That's how I meet most people. That's how I met Michael. It's like, oh, I like what you do. Hello, talk to me. But I'll hand over to you and let you introduce yourself.
Sure thing. So, I am the author of Discord for Dummies, the author of Twitch for Dummies, and the co-author of Podcasting for Dummies. Most people know me from Podcasting for Dummies because that's the one that's been out the longest. That first came out in 2006. And 5. You're right. I keep thinking 2006, but it's actually 2005. 2005 in November, actually. So it's going to be, this November marks 15 years of me being affiliated with the Podcasting for Dummies title.
Whoa.
Which is a long, long time. Especially in tech. In tech... In tech years, 15 years roughly is 2.8 million in human years. So that should give you an idea how long I've been involved with podcasting.
Which really then makes you ancient.
It really does. No, it really does. I mean, there are people that when I was writing Twitch for Dummies and I was describing my early experiences with video games, I would mention a ColecoVision. And they'd look at me and they would go, "What's a ColecoVision?" And I could say, look it up on Wikipedia. They'd look it up on Wikipedia and went, "This came out in 84? God, you're old." And I'm like, yep, you got it right. So get off my damn lawn. Get off my Animal Crossing lawn.
Yesterday I was recording a podcast and I said, I've been podcasting for 13 years now. And they were like, so was that only on MySpace back then? And I was like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, The evolution of podcasting has been fascinating to watch over these past 15 years. And every time we write the book, every time we go back to the book, and when I say we, the first book was me and Evo Terra, and then every edition from second edition on to present has been me and a guy named Chuck Tomasi. And Chuck Tomasi is also one of the longtime legends of podcasting. He did he still does a show called Technorama, and they're like in episode 600 and something or other. I mean, these guys are powerhouses. But I've watched the evolution of podcasting over the past 15 years, and it's funny because when it started off, it was something that nerds in the basement of the science building would do. You know, it was one step away from public access radio and public access television. And podcasting was a step underneath that, and then you go to the second and third edition, and the second and third edition, podcasting had gone from being something that nerds do in the basement of the science building to a punchline and a lot of jokes that involved media. I remember in the news. It was an Aaron Sorkin television show called The Newsroom, and Jane Fonda was the woman that ruled over this media conglomerate. And she said to the news director of ACN, she said, "Will McAvoy better watch himself. He's one broadcast away from hosting his own podcast." And that was the general thought, was that if you couldn't cut it in mainstream media, you would launch a podcast. Then we get to the fourth edition. And by this time, podcasting is suddenly serious business. You've got people rewriting history of podcasting, Did you know that this is a great one? This is one of my favorite soapboxes to shout off of. Did you know that thanks to Welcome to Night Vale, podcast fiction is a thing?
But that's not that old.
Yeah. Exactly. I did an article, I don't mind saying it, a backhanded bitch slap to Welcome to Night Vale and Forbes magazine, because Forbes magazine ran this article about how thanks to Welcome to Night Vale, podcast, this was the actual headline. Thanks to Welcome to Night Vale, podcast fiction is a thing.
But when was that?
2012.
I think by that time I had about 4 fiction books out as podcasts.
And it was like a few years after the first edition of your book, Podcasting for Dummies. So,
oh, yeah. Where I talk about audiobooks.com, where I talk about people like Tracy Hickman, Margaret Weiss. New York Times bestsellers have been doing this since 2005, 2006, but nobody bothered to look at the history. But the other evolution of podcasting that happened is that now it's being used as plot devices in things like Jordan Peele's reimagining of The Twilight Zone.
Okay.
I mean, it's now being taken very seriously, and now networks like Amazon Prime has done. They took a podcast called Slow Burn and they turned it into a miniseries, a very popular miniseries on Amazon Prime, where it goes into a deep dive of the evolution of the Watergate scandal, going all the way up to Nixon's resignation. I mean, it's really funny watching how podcasting has completely come full circle into something that nobody took seriously to something that everybody has to take seriously. And podcasting for dummies throughout the whole thing has been, look, you can take this seriously, and you should take podcasting seriously, but you shouldn't let it suck the joy out of it. When you do a podcast, at its core, there should be a passion. There should be something that's driving you forward to doing it. And I think that is one constant thread that we've had throughout all 4 editions.
But then let me go another step further back. When and how did you get into podcasting in the first place?
Very good question. So I got into podcasting strictly as a publicity stunt. You have to go back even further to when my very first book was published in 2002, and it's called Moravia. And in Moravia, it's sweeping action adventure. I describe it as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon meets Pirates of the Caribbean. And
so Pirates versus Ninjas.
Pretty much female ninjas, specifically female ninjas, and it was really a lot of because we could.
I'm interested and a bit aroused.
Oh yeah,
at the same time.
Yeah. I can't blame you. I was when I was writing it. But the way, but I will tell you that as we were gearing up to the book's launch, I was trying to kick around different ideas of how to promote the book, and the way I promoted the book. The original book was that I had pirates crash my book signing.
Oh, how cool!
And then a sword fight breaks out between me and the 5 pirates, and we had a ball doing this. I mean, it was so much fun doing this. Fast forward to the sequel that I'd written about 3 years later, and my publisher said, "Well, you made a huge impact with that first one. How are you going to top it?" And at that time, a couple friends of mine, Michael Armenegay and Evo Terra, were just getting into podcasting. And they were talking about how great it was, how cool it was, all these different things. And I contacted them out of the blue and I said, "Okay, guys, I have a crazy idea. How about I take Moravia and I podcast the whole thing and I drop episodes on your show?" And I remember they said at the time, "That's a pretty big book, D." And I said, "Yeah, I know it's a big book, which means I got to get started now." And they weren't kidding, because I started podcasting that book in January 2005, and I did not finish until July of 2005. So that was, and no one had ever done this before. Nobody knew what podcasting a novel would take. And I was, we were all flying by the seat of our pants back in 2005. Podcasting was a completely unexplored territory. There were people that were podcasting short fiction, but nobody was doing novels, full-length novels. And that was how I got into it. And when I was done podcasting Moravia, I had all this equipment, and I said, well, what do I do next? And it was the first time that I was like, okay, I'm not going to rely on the guys to do, to carry the episodes. So I said, okay, well then I'll go on ahead and I'll do it myself. And I figured out how do I set up a blog? How do I do all this? And then I launched the Survival Guide to Writing Fantasy. And I remember I was really nervous about it because it was unlike any other writer podcast that was out there. There was already several writing podcasts that had popped up, and everyone was talking about the craft, or productivity.
Marketing, probably.
And I stopped and I said, what was that?
And marketing and stuff like that.
No, there were no podcasts about marketing. No podcasts about business. None. I checked. And I said, well, why don't I try that? And the podcast was a huge success. First 2 seasons I was very proud of. I mean, it was I had interviews, and when I had authors on, I rarely talked about the craft of their books. I let them promote their books, but I talked about the challenges of promotion, the challenges of public speaking, all these things. I talked about stuff that they rarely get a chance to talk about. And I think the most frustrating part was how dismissive some of the higher echelon authors were at that time. Because a lot of them were very much, well, that's someone else's job. If you want to talk about the book, we can talk about the book. But marketing and business, that's someone else's job. But then I would sit down and really bend their ear and go, no, wait a minute. This is a very different arena we find ourselves in. How do you feel has changed? And some of the authors did open up. And then after I started, some other high profile authors started doing their own marketing podcasts. And I remember some of them were funny. I would just say they were funny because it was just their perspective. And my thing was, well, no, you got to look at other people's perspectives. And so in the Survival Guide, I talked to different authors about different things. Some authors understood, oh, okay, I need to talk about the process of marketing now, the process of business. Some authors came on my show and they just pimped their book. And I'm like, you need to listen. And there was, but again, we're talking 2005, 2006. So this is really like early on. This is, this predates writing excuses. This predates the creative pen. This predates all of those. And I was flying solo by the seat of my pants. And very few, if anybody, was talking about this, but that was, since then I have been podcasting about a variety of different things, and it's been a great journey.
And what I'm now interested in as well, because there are now still a lot more entertainment podcasts than fiction podcasts, and I know Podiobooks is not around anymore.
No, it is not.
But
we had a good run.
Yes.
We had a good run.
Yes. It was really great. You could find great stuff there, but obviously a lot of the people who went there were self-published authors, because if you had a publishing deal, most likely you have also signed away your audio rights.
That's true.
So was Podiobooks, or is podcasting work of fiction a legitimate way to make money, or at least get publicity with your self-published works?
Oh, absolutely. We had, on Podiobooks, we had a lot of stuff that was either previously published, or it was books or properties that successful authors couldn't find a home for. So Podiobooks became their home for it. And we did have a good amount of self-published stuff. And again, it was that idea of, if we give it away for free, we can drive it back to print books and people purchasing print books and things like that. And it did. It worked very well for Moravia. It worked very well for Billabub Battings. The biggest problem that I had with podcasting, particularly with fiction, and particularly with just podcasting as writers in general, is time. Is the time involved. When I was doing the Survival Guide to Writing Fantasy, I was trying to keep it very polished, very very focused. If I flubbed up something, I'd take the flub out. I would never do things in one take. And the more I would podcast, the easier it would get to do something in one take. Absolutely. Currently, the podcast I do with my wife, the Shared Desk, where we talk about writing, we talk about different things in the writing community. It's much easier for me to do a podcast like that because I have somebody to bounce ideas off of. So one take, no problem. We can easily banter back and forth, and then we can edit stuff that we don't think is appropriate out of the version that we send out to the public. But with podcast fiction, the toughest thing was sitting down and creating an audiobook. Yeah. That's basically what you're doing. And if you decide you want to do full cast audio, that's even more work. Then if you want to throw in music, if you want to throw in sound effects, that's even more work. Yeah. And Billabub Battings was a passion project. I'm the first one to say it. Billabub Battings, in the case of the Singing Sword, was an absolute passion project. I loved doing it. I have no regrets. I will never do that again.
I wanted to ask, since Audiobooks is gone, I've never checked, is Moravia and Billabub Battings still available to download?
It is available to download from Scribbly. I believe that's the name of them, Scribbly. Mm-hmm. And they put in ads. And no, I don't get any kickback from that. It was a deal in the signing off of stuff for audiobooks, and to me, I'm okay with it being out in the wild, because to me that's a piece of internet history, and I'm okay with it being out there.
And it's always been a passion project. I mean, it was not much different for me. I did my first one as a full cast, which was completely crazy on an absolutely mental schedule.
Yeah, and exactly.
I mean, you were thankfully part of it, but with the second one, I failed doing a full cast because I just eventually gave up chasing people for their recordings.
Yep.
So I said, if I'll ever do it again, I'll do it a straight read, or I'll do it with my husband, who I can lock up until he's recorded it. But at the end of the day, it's really, really hard work. And you've got so much higher standards in the audio quality, in the things you do. So, and I wanted to go into this in so much depth, because what I'm thinking is that there are probably listeners of ours who want to say, oh, look, I've written a book, right? Especially the publishing community in the legal world is, there are a couple of big publishers, but what if you want to self-publish? And what if you want to self-publish a book and say, yeah, what if I want to make an audiobook out of it? What if I want to podcast it? So I really want to say this is...
Well, I always want to write my own book about cybercrime and then do it full cast.
Okay. And you know what? Here's the thing.
And I'll be the one screaming a lot.
Yeah, that's perfect.
But again, regardless if it's nonfiction or fiction, regardless of any way to look at it, what you have to remember is a couple of things. One, if you're podcasting it, it means that you cannot release it as an audiobook, because in particular, Spotify and Audible,
ACX,
they have very strict rules. You either sell it or you give it away, but you can't do both. Which I totally get. Now, granted, I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule. I know that one of the biggest advocates of giving stuff away for free is Cory Doctorow, accomplished sci-fi author, accomplished digital advocate. I have been on panels with him before. Really good guy. I don't know how he navigates it, because one of the things that he basically makes very clear is, if I release a book, it's also available in free across the board, and I can give it away. And the big question is, does that equate as to sales? I don't know, because I've never been in that situation. I know that his first book did exceedingly well, and they gave it all away for free in every format. So there was no point in pirating his book, because it was already available to the general public. But when it comes to podcasting and it comes to writing, the thing you have to understand is, if you're committing to doing an audiobook or a podcast novel, or a podiobook, if you want to just stick with the old school term, podiobook.
Old school.
Whether you want to stick with podiobook or audiobook, what you're doing is taking away from time where you're going to be writing. So there's not going to be a lot of time for you and that was the problem I was running into with Survival Guide. With Survival Guide, I was spending so much time podcasting about the business of writing, I wasn't writing. So therefore, I was doing no business. Yeah. So I had to make...
Sorry. And how about this? I think I and Kat talked about this. I think you, Kat, you have it from the Lawyers podcast. This idea that you write a novel, even do an audiobook out of it, which is, I don't think, not that likely in our scientific books or in the books of law. But you then take further steps and further information, and you do a podcast of these further informations. Like so you go into the book and tell, okay, if you're interested in this specific area, it's too much to cover here in the book, but we have audio files.
A bit like you did with the Podcasting for Dummies podcast.
Exactly. Yes.
Or maybe for an author. I talked to a friend of mine yesterday, and he said, yeah, I've just finished a book and I want to publish it, and he has published already some books, and then we got into podcasting because I told him, yeah, me and Kat, we have a podcast. And that's okay, that's interesting, and what can I do as an author? And I said, well, why don't you let your main character do his own show or speak of it, because he has created a figure like a Indiana Jones guy, so to say, which is in the novel, and I said, well, give him a voice or do something about Twitter. It's not podcasting, so give him a Twitter account or do a short story and then don't publish it but do podcast it. This would be my approach.
Right. And that is a perfectly legit strategy. In fact, that's what I tell people is, with the amount of time that's involved in podcasting, I tell people I will never do long form podcasting again, unless I have no day job and I have pockets of downtime where I've got nothing to do. Then sure, I might do a novel, but the truth of the matter is that all the time that I spend with podcasting takes away from time where I'm writing. So I was trying to figure out the best way to do exactly what you were talking about, Michael, where you're trying to broaden the spectrum, broaden the experience of the book. And I feel like, and I think that the new hip way of describing this is transmedia. And that's where like a book ties in with a podcast, ties in with this. And while everyone talks about how transmedia is the cool thing to do, let me talk.
Also, not a new thing.
No, it's not a new thing, and I can and all the experiences I know of transmedia have been utter disasters. And I'll describe one to you: The Matrix.
Lost.
The Matrix.
Okay.
The Matrix is
what is the Matrix?
Exactly.
You can't explain it.
You can't explain it, and neither can you explain those goddamn sequels either. The original Matrix is amazing.
What sequels?
Exactly.
There are no sequels.
There are no sequels. There was only one Matrix movie, two Aliens films, and
one Pirates of the Caribbean.
And one Pirates of the Caribbean. Thank you. Yeah. You guys get me.
Thank you.
You guys
get
me.
Yeah, we totally get you. We're on the same page, literally.
But here was one of the problems with the Matrix sequels. In particular, the biggest problem with the Matrix sequels is they were filming two films at the same time. That was already a massive undertaking. So you basically have the two movies being filmed at the same time, which is fine. But then you have the Animatrix,
which is good,
and the Animatrix, which is great. But it's an anthology series that ties in with Matrix 2 and 3. Kind of. Then you have the Matrix Online, which was an MMORPG, and if you were playing the MMORPG and watching the Animatrix and going into the films, and then I believe I want to say there was also no, there wasn't a comic. I don't think there was a comic book or a graphic novel tie-in. Yeah, I know. I own them. Okay. So think about that for a second. To follow the plot line that they were trying to do with the Matrix Reloaded and the Matrix Evolution, you had to watch both films, and you had to be playing the MMORPG. RPG. Then you had to watch the Animatrix, and then you had to get the graphic novel. That was the first attempt at doing transmedia, and a lot of other transmedia experiences all tried to do this, and every time it was an utter disaster, because you're telling your audience, but you're basically telling your audience, if you want to understand everything that's happening in these two films, you got to watch the two films, and you've got to get a graphic novel, and you've got to play an RPG, and you've got to you got to watch this anime anthology series. That's asking a lot from an audience that just wants to go to 2 movies and get their storytelling there.
My argument, hear me out.
Go for it.
Is Starship Troopers. One of the best things in the first movie are these television broadcasts.
Would you like to know more? Yeah.
That's exactly. And they do a kind of a new kind of from this perspective in this year, a kind of new media,
right?
Because we were all still watching TV and no smart TVs and so. And then, okay, here we have the main story. And do you want to know more? This is exactly the thing where I would be going with my transmedia. I'm currently planning. I teach with the Anwaltsakademie, and I'm about to teach civil law again. It will be 2021, and currently I have the idea just to do the script, to do the kind of book, but to do also maybe few word files. Documents the students need, or even some audio guidance, which then I put, I don't know, a link or a QR code in the script, and then I say, okay, this script is the main. You got all you need, but if you want to know more, then follow the White Rabbit.
But that's what I was saying, because I was just recently reading the Small Firm Roadmap, which is a self-published book by the Lawyerist, which are basically as a website for, as it says, small and one-person law firms. And they're doing a podcast. I mean, they're on episode, I think, 250 or something now.
Not bad.
So when I started, I went back a couple of episodes and then looked, okay, what I was interested in, like in the last 2 years. But then in the book, they kept referring back, and that's what I told Michael. So they were like, this is the chapter about this and that, but there's a podcast episode where we talk about this for an hour. And so it's like, oh, that's great, but that was episode 30. So I went back and listened to episode 30. So that was, especially in things like that are a bit evergreen as well, when you say, okay, this is like a quick guide how to use Twitter, but we've got the Twitter guy on our podcast for an hour. So that's and that's exactly the point, and that's what we're talking about. Like if we were to start writing a book about legal tech and say, you can do a podcast and refer back to this episode. So I think that's less forced.
It is.
I think the problem you have is when you have to do all these other things.
That's the difference.
That's exactly my point.
That is where transmedia, I think, fails. If you have to do something to get the full experience of a story, then you're not telling a good story. It's and I'll give you another good example of where, and this isn't really transmedia, but I think it's just how Marvel Studios did what they did.
I knew it. You were talking about the MCU.
Yeah.
I totally waited for it because I have the exact same opinion.
Right.
But sorry,
yeah,
please go on.
It's okay. It's a passion. It's something good to be passionate about, Michael. But the thing is that what's great about it is you can watch these movies either in chronological order when they came out, or you can watch them independently. They all have a standalone story, but they're seeded with all these little nods and all these little moments that you get from other films. So they're all interconnected. And here's where I turn to, going back to, if you want to use podcasting as a medium, as a storytelling medium for fiction, because yes, as Kat was saying, and as I've been saying with the Podcasting for Dummies companion podcast, we basically take concepts and then we build on them, and we talk about ways of what has changed since the time of the book's final edits and the book's publishing, and what has happened. We can still keep Podcasting for Dummies relevant. I can still keep Twitter for Dummies relevant because I'm talking about stuff on my streams that I was like, yeah, this happened after it was published. So let's talk about what that changed and how that affects your stream. So there's a lot you can do with that, but it's a little tougher with fiction. But you can still have some fun with it, because what we did with the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, the steampunk series that my wife and I read, or that my wife and I did, we knew we couldn't give the story away for free.
Now I love you even more.
Right. I think you. Oh, just wait until you hear the podcast. Wait until you hear the podcast.
I'm deep into steampunk.
Okay.
Steampunk is one of my favorite genres.
There might be a short story from me in there as well.
There might be, and the thing is, that's what made this such a fun event, because we were saying, okay, we reached, and to keep the work minimal for us, we said, all right, we're still working on the series, but we want to produce this podcast. So we turned to authors that we knew, both, published New York, self-published, never published, and we said, we'd like for you to write a story in this universe. Here are the terms. Here's the here's the parameters you have to work in. And then we went one step further and we said, and here's the contract, because we were paying these people, and we said, because we can't pay you union rates, here's what we're offering. And if you don't want to do it, then you don't have to. No skin off your nose. But very few people turned us down. But we basically said, we own the story for a year. Then once the story has been in our possession for a year, it's yours. You can go on ahead, file off the serial numbers, as we like to say, get rid of any references towards the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences or any characters in the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences series. Make this your own, and you've got a story ready to ship out to a whole bunch of people. And authors like to have that freedom, because instead of being tied to one property, they have this story, and they go, well, then I'll just change the numbers, take out any ministry references, and I can circulate this anywhere, which was a real appeal for people. But what was great about it was that these were stories that basically flushed out the ministry universe. And in later books, we would reference those. We would talk about incidences that happened in different parts of the world. And readers who were familiar with the podcast were like, oh, I know what that reference is. But the thing is, if you'd never heard the podcast, you could still enjoy the ministry series. Both were standalones, but both were connected. And that's where podcasting can really market and help you market the book, because a lot of people found the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences through the podcast. So, and
for me, it was also quite cool, because you have, world building, especially if you're in speculative fiction, which is fantasy, science fiction, steampunk, and all these things, is that world building is a lot of work. So if you have already a world that you enjoy reading, that I've read obviously all the books that had come out at that point when you asked me to join. So, and then not to meddle too far. I think it was really cool. So I did a bit of research. Like, okay, what was going on here at that time? And the cool thing was that the Empress Sissi, who's such an iconic figure in Austrian history, was alive at that time. So to make her a steampunk heroine was, kind of the obvious choice. So what you're saying is that you can take a book, you can take something that's published and make it so much more by inviting other people in, even though you might be restricted in your rights when it comes to the core piece of work. You say, okay, I think you mentioned once that you couldn't podcasting for dummies itself, but then you can invite other people in. You can make the podcast. You can invite guests there, so you can expand on that world without actually violating your publishing contract. And then, if you're not self-published.
Yeah, and then now, granted, there are going to be some instances though where you might need to get written permission if we have characters that were previously mentioned in the short stories and another author had come up with them, we would reach out and say, can we get written permission from you that we can use these characters in these future novels? And because we didn't want to say, we definitely did not want to say, okay, look, once you write this story for us, it's ours, we own it, yada yada yada, because we knew that we couldn't pay union wages. But then we figured, these will be one shots, no big deal. And then we had the case of Jack Mangan. Jack Mangan was an author who we love him dearly. He's one of those guys that we like to say he should be published more often. I love his work. And he came up with a story called Knight's Plutonian Shore from season 1. And he created what were known as the Agents of Awesome, OSM, the Office of the Supernatural and the Metaphysical. And this was the American equivalent of the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences. Pip and I fell in love with this concept, and we said, and then by the third book, we were like, we're going to America. And I said, well, we have to have the Agents of Awesome there. So we created basically 2 characters that were Agents of Awesome, and they were the carbon. It's an old trope, but we loved working with it. It was basically a flipped version of Books and Brawn. The guy was the field agent, rootin' tootin' steampunk guy, and his female partner was a librarian. And so between the two, and the funny thing is Eliza calls her an archivist, and she goes, "No, I'm a librarian," which was a nice little tie back to the original book. But because we were dealing with the Office of the Supernatural Metaphysical, we had to go to Jack, and we said, "Are you okay with us using this?" And he gave us a written permission slip that said, "They have my permission." We dedicated the 3rd book to Jack because without Jack, that element wouldn't have been there. And that sort of, and we did callbacks to the Knight's Plutonian Shore case and all these different things. And that is something that you have to do from a legal perspective. That is, if you're a writer and you open your world to different people, either A, they have to know that they still own that story if you're not paying them. B, if you're paying them, what are the conditions? Because if you can pay union dues, if you can pay union scale or better, then you can basically say, we own this story, period, for 5 years, and we are allowed to use these characters however we want. If you're not paying union scale, then you got to say, okay, let's barter, let's trade on the terms. And this is where I feel like authors need more consulting on. Yeah, you can sit down, you can write a story, you can hammer it out, you can do world building, that's great. But when you start getting the brass tacks of business, authors like to use that fallback position of, well, that's someone else's job. And I'm like, yeah, that's why you're not doing a podcast like the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, Tales from the Archives. And so you really need to understand how contracts work. You need to understand how business terms work. You need to understand the pros and cons of it so that you're not ripping off artists that you want to work with, and artists don't feel like they're being ripped off.
I mean, what's very interesting is, thanks for the US point of view on these matters, but I always found that there are some who are really interested, who take that stuff serious, and some who don't give a damn really much.
Right. That's right.
But I think before we get lost a lot in fiction writing, let's take a step back to podcasting, because
sure.
You talked about the whole history of podcasting, and I've again and again have people acting as if podcasting is the new hot shit, really.
It is,
and yep. I mean, there've been, especially now in lockdown, there've been so many podcasts that have come up, and I wish we had launched ours sooner so it wouldn't look like a lockdown podcast, but it's on Michael's.
You're doing a trendy thing, right? Exactly.
Yeah, but I can blame Michael, because he refused to podcast with me, so I had to give him a microphone for Christmas, and then I made him do it, basically. And now he's all...
That is actually true. And at first I was not sure if it would work, but now I'm loving it.
And so I went actually into coaching for starting my own law firm, and we were talking about all the ways, to market yourself, to do a bit something different. And I said, when it comes to online and social media, I'm not that comfortable with taking videos of myself. It just doesn't feel right. And I was like, I've got an idea. You know what you should do? You should podcast. And I was like, really? Yeah. Thank you for that idea. So I mean, he was right, and he got the point. But what I'd be interested in is, why is it such a hot shit now? And the other question is, video podcast versus audio podcast. Advantages, disadvantages, apart from the work.
Well, okay. First question, why is it suddenly popular now? and this is even, we're not even going to talk about the COVID lockdown and people are trying to find stuff to do. And it's like, well, F it, I'll do a podcast. The podcasting has reached, I think it's, oh crap, by now it's the 8th Renaissance. It just seems like every few years, suddenly podcasting, somebody rediscovers podcasting. A lot of times it comes from business. Take for account Spotify. Spotify has 2 exclusive 7-figure podcasts that are now currently dominating their streaming channels: the Michelle Obama podcast and the Joe Rogan Experience. All right. And
Okay.
When people suddenly saw how much money was exchanging hands over something that was being given away for free, people are just like, holy crap, there's something to this. But even before that, people were taking Aaron Minke's lore and turning it into an Amazon Prime series. They were taking Slow Burn, turning it into an Amazon Prime series. BuzzFeed was doing Unsolved, and it became BuzzFeed Unsolved on YouTube, and then went from YouTube to Amazon Prime, and then Comedy Central. Even before all that, Comedy Central, there's a podcast that went to YouTube that became the very popular Drunk History. You know, I mean, and all this stuff.
Wow.
All this stuff goes back to it's when it started making money. When it started, you know, every time there's a sudden surge of where did this originate? Everyone says, "Ooh, it's a podcast." Then suddenly, ooh, that's one of the first reasons why it is so trendy now to do a podcast, because a lot of people are doing podcasts and they're making bank off of it. That's one thing. Second thing, and this is
so like a gold rush.
It is. Oh, absolutely, it's a gold rush. Absolutely, it's a gold rush. If you want to use another terminology, it's like it's a bit like the arms race. United States got an A-bomb, then Russia got an A-bomb, then suddenly a few more people got A-bombs, and then they got H-bombs, and then suddenly everybody's got some kind of nuclear device going on. That's kind of the same thing. It started off and people didn't understand it, and then because if you were to say what has changed in the 15 years that I'm happiest about, the best part of the 15 years of podcasting is that I do not have one single idiot asking me, I can't listen to a podcast. I don't have an iPod. Why do I need an iPod to listen to a podcast? God, I hated that. And yet there are still some there's some tech savvy technophobes out there who still insist that instead of calling it a podcast, they're going to call it a netcast. And they're still on that high horse about it. I'm like, dude, Webster's dictionary recognized the term podcast. Get over it, move on, and call what you're doing a goddamn podcast.
I think maybe in times where we still hand wrote our own XML feeds, maybe then it was okay.
Yeah, maybe then. But that was the funny thing. That was one of the first things we removed from the book. From the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies, there is no tutorial on how to write your own XML. Because
that was always nostalgic for me.
I know.
I mean, I'm glad I gave that up.
Exactly. You
had
just
no other
answered the
chance
reason
back then.
Yeah, but you see, you just answered our own question. Because I sat down with Chuck and I said, Chuck, who is really doing XML by hand? And he said, I don't know of anybody. I said, I know one person that is doing their XML by hand. I used to work for him, and the guy was so smart he was an idiot. And I'll tell you a quick story. This is what I mean by it. I looked at their podcast, and their podcast was an absolute mess. There was no ID3 tagging. The show art was crap. The show description was crap. And the worst part of all, the guy who was the host of the podcast, who was our CEO, bragged about having a podcast, but it was nowhere on the website for the school. Nowhere. And I went to my boss and I said, I'd like to start up an initiative to help clean up the podcast. And he immediately just held up his hand. He said, I'm going to stop you there, T. The answer is no. And I said, why? And he said, because that podcast belongs to Dr. Schertz. And I said, "Can I speak frankly?" And he was like, "Sure." I closed the door and I said, "I'm the guy that wrote Podcasting for Dummies. And I'm telling you right now, his podcast is a mess. And nobody knows where it is." He goes, "I know." And I'm like,
That's why we didn't link to it, probably.
No. He said, "I know." And I said, "Well, then why can't I help?" And he said, "Because T, you know more than he does. And he doesn't like it." Those are the exact words. You know more than him, and he's not going to like that. And then he added, "And besides, the last person that wanted to help with the podcast didn't last long here." I was like, "What?" And he's like, "There's a lot of things that the CEO is hands off on, but one of them that is not is the podcast." And I was stunned. But then I realized, I'm like, oh, this is, and the thing was, one of the things that he was doing, and the reason why it was such a mess on iTunes, that was the only place you could find it too, was iTunes. But you had to look for it by name and by his name. And the only way, but the reason why it was such a mess and why nobody could find it was because the RSS was being coded by hand every week. And I was like, oh, this is, whoa. Yeah, it was just, and this was 2014. 2014. I'm like, you're an idiot, dude.
I did that 13 years ago. I hand wrote, like 2006, 2007, I wrote my
That's
own
fine.
XML.
2006, 2007. Yes, absolutely. But I totally get that. But that was 2006, 2007. You know, that's like podcasting year 4. I mean, I'm talking about it's podcasting year 12, year 13. And meanwhile, this guy has one of the guys in IT. He wasn't hand coding it. He basically got the audio file to the guy in IT and said, "Update the RSS feed." I was like, dude. But
thing is that even today, many people, I'm a big supporter of RSS feeds because I got my news via Feedly,
right,
and before that via Google Feed,
right,
until it ended. The thing is, when I talk to somebody and they say, "Well, I have read that on the feed and I have an RSS feed and I have like 1,000 sources."
That makes me more aggressive. If people say they've got a blog and I can't, I put in the link into Feedly, it doesn't work to subscribe. They know where they've got a button to the RSS feed. That's just like, you don't have a blog.
Well,
you have a page.
Yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst. If somebody has a blog and he doesn't have an RSS feed. That's I'm also very passionate about. But thing is, also people today, a lot of people don't know what an RSS feed is. And as you said, T, it's exactly, most people associate podcasts with iPod, with Apple. I don't know why, but I can only relate to that kind of, because I also learned about podcasts first via Apple.
It became big because of Apple. Apple was for podcasting. iTunes and Apple recognizing podcasts was the big break for podcasting. It literally opened the floodgates. Because I remember saying in between the second and third edition, in the second edition, it was even in the first edition. Like right before the first edition came out, iTunes said, you can now use us as an RSS aggregator. And you can get podcasts. And it was really cool because in 2005, I could go to iTunes, pull up podcasts, and recognize everybody in the top ranked. I was like, I know that person, I'm buds with that person, I'm buds with that. And that was cool. By the time 2008 rolled around for the second edition, I would get up there and I would say, well, I know that person, that's ESPN, that's HBO. And it was like half and half. Then by the time the third edition came out, I didn't recognize anybody in the aggregator. I had to dig to suddenly find, there's Mur Lafferty, and that to me was one of the big but I would say Apple made podcasting a little more mainstream because of RSS and because of the nature of how to subscribe to a podcast. Apple simplified it. Spotify has made it even simpler. But let's get to that. You mentioned about thoughts on video podcasting. we actually made a big change in the 4th edition of Podcasting for Dummies, and we took out the video podcasting chapter.
Okay.
And we replaced
because of YouTube, etc.
No, we replaced it with streaming. Because now, instead of people associating podcasts with Apple, they're now associating podcasts with YouTube. When I first started streaming, there were people saying, "Yeah, we're recording a podcast today." I said, "Oh, cool." So I went on ahead and I watched the podcast, and I said, "So where's the episode going to be once you're done editing it?" And they're like, "Oh, we're just going to upload it to YouTube." And I said, "So where's the RSS feed?" And every host I talked to said the same thing. What's an RSS feed? And that's when I realized podcasting was now going through us. And in the third book, Chuck and I drew a line in the sand. And we said, if you are not using an RSS feed, you're not podcasting. And then but then after a year of fighting that, of dying on that hill, I realized podcasting is actually evolving. It's evolving now. And this was the way, and in a weird way, it's evolving the way they wanted it to evolve back in 2008, back in 2006, 2007, 2008. And let me give you an example. I'm going to pull an old buddy from the back closet. I'm sure, Kat, you'll recognize it. Do you remember TalkShoe?
Hey, I only just recently went back to TalkShoe and was like, well, that's where my old files are.
And I'm telling you,
I actually did more podcasts than I admitted or remembered.
The thing about TalkShoe that I hated, is that TalkShoe wanted so badly to say, we support live podcasting. You can have interaction with chat. Woo, and that was such a big selling point for TalkShoe. I could never get it to work. And the guys from TalkShoe were absolute jerks to me, because I basically explained the situation, and they were like, "Well, let's take a look at it." And I said, "Look, here's the situation." And they were like, "Well, we're looking into it. Here's the situation. We're still looking into it. Here's the situation." And then they were like, "We heard you the first time. Maybe you need a better computer." And the thing was that at the time, I had the top of the line Mac with, like, at that time, it was something like, I think for the basics, you needed to run it on like I want to say 6 gigs of RAM, and I had 18, and they were trying to tell me, "Yeah, your Mac just doesn't have the specs to run this." And I'm sitting there going, that's a crock of crap right there. But I could never get TalkShoe to work. But then there were other podcasters. Every podcaster I knew who worked with TalkShoe, they had their own set of problems. But that was fixed. Hang on. That was fixed with Twitch and with streaming media. Now you had that live interaction. Now you were able to talk to your audience. And that was a total game changer. And now I'm looking at what people are doing on Twitch, and I'm like, yeah, they're podcasting. Because they've got a distribution feed, they're creating media, and even more so, they are dealing with a live audience, which is pretty freaking cool. And the way we worked around it, and the happy medium that I came up with was, look, if you really want to know where, and this is why Twitch works better than video podcasting. The biggest problem with video podcasting is people could never get the size of the files down to something manageable. Especially if you wanted to go, oh, someone once said, I have a 20-minute podcast. I want to do a video version of it, but the size is huge. What do I do? And everybody would have the same answer. You have to do a shorter podcast. That was the only solution. But with streaming media, here's the workaround. You basically do what the three of us are doing here, but you've got the live audience. You talk to the live audience. We talk amongst ourselves. And then when we're done, you take this stream and you export it to YouTube. There's your video episode. But then you've got the audio from that episode. You clean it up. You make your edits where you need to. And then you put that in the RSS feed. So now you got your video podcast and you got your audio podcast. and it's all being distributed. One's being distributed through YouTube, the other one's being distributed through RSS. And that is, I really believe, streaming media, Twitch, Facebook Live, Periscope, and YouTube Gaming, YouTube Live, whatever you want to call it. These streaming services have solved the problem that video podcasting could never quite. That's why video podcasting, I don't think, really caught on, because there was just it was apart from the production aspect of it, you also have the file size.
Yeah, and it filled up the iPod
right
very quickly.
But
I have to before we move on, I have to quickly defend TalkShoe. I've never used its live feature, but TalkShoe for a long time was one of the best free podcast hosts, because you had to find a space to put even your small tiny MP3 files. So that's what it was very good for.
Yes, but TalkShoe's big appeal, at least back in 2000, at least in the early 2000s, its big appeal wasn't that it was a free host, but that you could do live podcasts with audiences and call-ins and things like that. And I think of like the 10 times that I was involved with TalkShoe, either as a podcaster or as a guest, it worked seamlessly twice.
Ouch.
Twice.
So what, in your opinion, I mean, there is this thing, okay, you've got this hype again, and we've had the podcasting hypes, like you said, 4 or 5 times already, but then you see podcasts just pod fade, which means they just suddenly stop, there are no new episodes. And I have to admit, I've let things pod fade. And obviously these things happen, but with all the people jumping on the bandwagon, and you've seen it the last couple of renaissances.
Gold rushes.
Let's do gold rushes. I kind of like the gold rush analogy. That's actually quite good. I'm going to use that, Michael.
Thanks.
I'm going to use that.
It's okay.
The last couple of rushes. So what were the other mistakes that people made? Which podcasts fail, or why do podcasts fail, in your opinion?
Aside from the ones that are crap, obviously.
Well, but why are they crap?
Well, no, first off, I try to stay away from "this is crap" because there have been podcasts that I've listened to.
This could be improved. Name it.
I mean, no, I would say the reason I stay away from that is because there are podcasts I've listened to that I go, this is absolute crap. I will never listen to this ever again. And they were insanely popular. Back in the day. There was an entire podcast that not only was the podcast. There was this one podcast back in the early days of podcasting that was not only popular. They basically got a book deal, and I think they wound up very briefly on, if they may still be there, but they wound up very briefly on XM radio. And yet I found their podcast unlistenable. Not even because of its toxic content, but just the audio quality of the podcast was crap. Didn't matter. People ate it up. Now, that's great for them. But I mean, when it comes to pod fading, the main reason I see people pod fading is that they don't know how much work is involved in a podcast. They just think I turn on my phone, start recording, and then I'm done and I upload it and that's it. And you can do that. That's fine. One of my early episodes of Podcasting for Dummies was, okay, we're going to do a podcast 3 different ways. We're going to do one completely on the fly. We're going to do one completely with a little bit of production, but we're going to do it in one take. And the third way we're going to do it is we're going to do it with editing, and we're going to do it with a little polish and a little bit of creativity. So people heard each version. And one of the most popular things that people did was a CarCast, where they would take their portable recorder. At that time, it was the iRiver, which I still have my iRiver floating around here somewhere. It doesn't work, but I still have it. They'd hang it off of their windshield, windshield window, and they just start talking. no intro, no outro. And that's the easiest way to do a podcast. But then it comes to, okay, if you're doing a daily podcast, if you're doing it no frills, then that's not a problem. But it's still a lot of work getting those episodes off there and putting them up and then putting a blog post with it, putting some show notes. All that stuff takes time. And even if you keep your production values simple and basic, it's a lot of work. Coming up with ideas for your podcast can be tough. First 10 episodes, you could probably map it out. But like right now, Pip and I are past the 100th episode of the Shared Desk, but it took us a long time to get there because either A, we didn't have a lot to talk about, or B, we had other projects that we were working on. And so, yeah, I think the main reason why a lot of podcasts fail is that people think, one, this will be easy, and it's not. And then there's a second reason. A lot of stuff pod fades. It's not a runaway success. It's not Welcome to Night Vale. It's not Serial. It's not Lore. It's not Slow Burn. You feel like you're talking in a vacuum. And the truth of the matter is that if you're doing this to be the next big media thing, you got the wrong idea about podcasting. You should be doing a podcast because you love it, you enjoy it, and you really, the only thought you have is not your numbers, but when do we get the podcast again? That should be your thought when you turn off the mic. Your thought is, when do we do this again? And if that's not your thought, then you might be podcasting for the wrong reasons.
I'm glad to hear that we have the right reason. Because Kat and I, even as I said at first, I was a bit skeptical, but I'm loving it, and it's a very good way of meeting very interesting people. So I simply love doing it, and sometimes Kat tells me the numbers, but either I don't know them or I forget them. But also with the production, for me it's very, very, very easy because that's the thing Kat does, because I don't know how to do it. So it's for me really basically, so okay, I have to be an appointed time, I have to be online, and I have to give my 10 cents.
Right.
And she does the polishing. That's
well, because I'm a control freak and
yeah, that's true. But I wanted to formulate it rather positive, not.
All right.
negative.
Okay. Well, I've got an actual issue because I am very what I always say is what I can't see, I make up in hearing. Mm-hmm. So I'm very, very sensitive when it comes to voices. And there have been fantastic books that I loved reading that I could not manage 5 minutes into the podcast, into the audiobook, because some people just have voices for photography. And I'm really, really bad. I was like, I want to read this, but it sounds horrible. So audio quality is a thing for me as well. And I'd start fiddling around with the audio files. And I'm thinking, and then I'm listening to other podcasts which are successful. And I'm thinking, how can people put that out? I mean, all these clicks and noises and repeaty things. And oh my God, I couldn't even. And then recently we had a guest who said, yeah, that's actually what he finds kind of nice and charming about a podcast, when it sounds normal, when it sounds more like a conversation rather than a staged interview. So there's a bit of a balance for me in that, but yeah, I guess maybe I should start billing Michael or something. But at the end of the day,
okay, that's reasonable.
Right, good. But what I often said, and I don't know if it's still in your book, but that was just the thing. T says you have to have pre-recorded, 5 episodes before you launch your podcast? Are you still of that opinion? Because I keep quoting you, and I'm not sure if you still think that.
Well, it's actually changed quite a bit. It actually changed in the 3rd edition. In the third edition, instead of saying have 5 shows mapped out, and we were doing that with podcast fiction. If you're going to do a podcast novel, have 5 episodes, mapped out. It's changed for
start with the the entertainment stuff
non-fiction,
first.
Entertainment, informational, educational. I tell people have 10 ideas, have 10 topics you want to talk about for a show. Every topic should be 1 episode. And if you have if 10 ideas come rapid fire, then okay, maybe we have enough that we can do a weekly show, or if you want to stretch out that content, if you can map out 10 ideas for a show, then I can either do a weekly show or I can make this content stretch out, and I can do it on a fortnightly schedule. So every other week I'm posting a show. And if 10 episodes come at you really rapid fire, then you're like, okay, I think we're ready to do a podcast. And if you want to map out beyond 10 shows, then go ahead. But that's the thing, is that if you can't come up with 10 evergreen topics, you might have to step back and go, okay, let's really consider what kind of podcast we want to do and what we want to talk about. What are the parameters? If you're doing podcast fiction and you say, I want to podcast a novel from beginning to end, you want to have that entire book done, recorded from beginning to end. Have the book written, because it's easy to throw commentary at the beginning and commentary at the end and then send it out as an episode. But the entire book should be laid out. It should be edited. It should be done. It should be recorded. And that way, if you have to keep the commentary before and after short, you can. But if you don't have time, you can just throw up the next chapter and then walk away from it. So that's what's changed, is that originally it was 5 episodes. Now we're saying make sure it's 10, because the reason why we were saying 5 episodes was that there was this huge thing that we noticed, this huge trend when podcasting first became popular on iTunes, where people would do literally 3 episodes in pod fade, 3 and out, and it wasn't that they were done; they just didn't want to do it anymore. And that was after 3 episodes. And so I do think planning is essential to the success of a podcast and from avoiding pod fade. I've had it happen to me before. I've had it happen on projects that I never wanted to pod fade, and I've had it on projects where it's just like I really couldn't muster the passion to sit down and do an episode. Just couldn't. So so what I do now is I make sure that we always have something to talk about, and if we don't, I bring it up on stream. I go, yeah, we were aiming for an episode this week. It's not happening. It's just it, and to me, I'm like, and I think my listeners know that when we podcast, it's because it's in the schedule to do so, that we can do this. I've been very busy during this time of COVID. I was doing final edits on Discord for Dummies when COVID first hit, and then I did the revamp of Podcasting for Dummies, and then we just finished and released this week the print edition, the print edition of Social Media for Writers, 2nd edition. So I have managed to crank out 3 books in this during this COVID period. Now, has my podcasting schedule taken a hit? You bet it has. But that's because I am a podcaster, but I'm a professional writer first, and I got to be writing first before I can podcast.
Okay, I've got one last question about one of the holy cows of podcasting, because you said it became a trend because people started making money with it. So in the beginning of podcasting, podcasts that you have to pay for to listen to was one of those absolute no-goes. Yeah. And then some podcasts started to finance themselves with advertisements and sponsorships and stuff. What's the approach now? Is having a paid podcast now a thing? I don't think I've come across one. Or do you really just use it as a marketing tool and maybe finance yourselves through Patreon or ads?
I know one. Kind of. It's one of the first podcasts I've listened to is the HP Podcraft, the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast, where they did. It is Chris Leckie and Chad Pfeiffer, and they did for a few years. They did all the works of HP Lovecraft, which is my favorite author, and kind of invented, as I see it, the shared universe. By the way. And then they did something. They went to I think Patreon, and they said, okay, we have released the episodes on a weekly basis. Now we have finished all the Lovecraft stories, but we want to do, because we love doing it, we want to do other authors of horror and weird fiction like Poe and also Dunsany and Robert D. Howard and things like that. And they said, okay. From now on, we change your schedule. There will be once a month, there will be a free episode. You can get via the normal podcast, the normal RSS feed. But the other 3 episodes a month, the ones on the weekly basis, you actually have to pay for. And it's not very expensive. And I think they make good money of it.
And Phil Rossi, one of the what I call the second vanguard of podcast fiction writers. You love him, Michael, because he does really good horror. Phil Rossi has both.
But then we have to send him towards Paul Cooley as well.
That is, yes, Paul Cooley as well. Of course, you got Scott Sigler, and but I was always more. And one of the things that Phil has done is that he does the free episode. But then if you want some of the other stuff that he's doing, then you go to his Patreon. And that has been a growing trend, because Patreon's a great way to do podcasting for pay. It was and I've seen more people gravitate towards that model, which I think is a good model. Some of the other people previous to that, they were putting their podcast behind a paywall, and they were like social media gurus and business gurus and marketing.
I'm always skeptical when the word guru.
Yeah, I know. I hate the term myself, and I used to push back on it all the time, and now I'm just like, you know what? If you call me a guru, fine, but I'm not going to charge you for it. I'm only going to charge you for it if you want to hire me full time. But but when it comes to podcasting.
So you're more of an evangelist? No,
I consider myself a professional. In light of current events, if I were the social media director of the White House, I wouldn't be circulating videos that I couldn't authenticate, and I'm going to leave it at that.
I think you wouldn't even do that. Period.
Well, no,
let
I
alone...
wouldn't, because I'm just going to be blunt. The last time someone said, hey, I was just following orders, it didn't end well for them. I'm just going to leave it there. And move on. So, but
let's talk about the moralities of getting paid for podcasts.
No. The morality for getting paid for podcasts is absolutely, if it keeps the lights on, yes. I did sponsorships for a couple of my podcasts, and I was able to buy a new microphone with it. I was able to buy couple months of hosting with it. Absolutely, you have to pay the bills. And I'll give you a social media related story, and since you brought his name up, I'm going to call him out. I was on Kickstarter, and I was on Kickstarter, and I was promoting Billabub Battings and the Case of Dillinger's Diamond, which was going to be the 3rd book in the series, provided I made $15,000. This was an average book advance. I was doing this to keep the lights on. This was the cost I came up with. I was basing it off of sales that I basically did exactly what a big time publisher did. And I remember when it got out that I said, well, if I don't get the $15,000, I'm not writing it. Paul Cooley wrote a rather scathing article about me. basically saying that I was holding the work hostage. Now, I responded. I went, Paul, I love you, buddy. I love you. And I do. I love the Big Palooka. But here's the thing, Paul. This is not a passion project. This is a business. And while people love saying, give it away for free, give it away for free, give it away for free, the only reason they can give it away for free is because they know that in the back end, they're going to get paid by somebody. Whether it is a big publisher or whether it is an indie publisher or whether they are going to sell the book on their own. And the people that usually, when you see the books that are given away for free, 9 times out of 10, after the first chapter, you're like, I get it. This is why it's being given away for free. I used to be, and I'd be the first one to say, I used to be one of those people that believed that, yes, give it away. Absolutely. Give it away for free. But then I started to notice there was a sense of entitlement. Well, T gave this away for free, so he should give this away for free. And because he gave that away free, he should give this away for free. And at some point, you're like, well, wait a minute. I need to make money. Because that was the thing. When the second book came out, when the Case of the Pitcher's Pendant came out, the next big question that everybody would ask me is, oh, you got a new book coming out. Yeah. Are you going to podcast it? Consistently.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point. But that's what also reason for me where I thought, actually, it's not a bad thing to just have, if you've got a series and you have, you're on your third book or something, to have the first book, just the first book, either for free as an ebook or the free podcast, etc. I think that is a good way to say, okay, I'm going to hook people. I'm going to give them like the first fix for free and then hook them and then...
You're right. And that is a perfectly legit...
Yeah, that's drug speech. I know.
I'll give you an example of somebody who does this, and it's relevant to what I'm doing now. Destiny. I am a big fan of the game Destiny from Bungie. I love the game. And right now, if you wanted to play Destiny, you could go onto a PC, you could go onto a PS4, you could go onto an Xbox, and you could download for free something called Destiny New Light. And that is Destiny 2 from the day it dropped on September 17th all the way up to, I believe, Shadowkeep. Now, Shadowkeep is their last DLC. That one, if you want to do Shadowkeep, you got to pay for that. And that'll pay for everything up to present day. But they're giving away, let's see, so you get for free Destiny 2, Curse of Osiris, Warmind, Forsaken, and that's it. All right. So, and these are all 4 games that I paid for, right? I paid for these games. Do I think it's bad that they're giving this stuff away for free now? No, because the stuff has already been, it's already past its shelf due date. So it's just sitting there. Why not give it away for free, get people hooked, and they go, I want to play more, and like, well, you're going to have to pay for that. And that is a perfectly legit strategy. But to say, okay, I got all this stuff for free. Oh, look, there's Shadowkeep. Can I get that for free too? Well, no. Well, then you're holding the game hostage. No, you're trying to pay the bills. And I would be the first one. And the thing is, and before you ask, Kat, Paul and I did talk about it. We talked about what happened. And at one point he said, so we're cool.
At the end, it's just a big fluffy bunny.
He anyway. Is. And he said, so we're cool. And I said, dude, we've always been cool. You and I just have a different way of doing business. And that was why we left it. But I got some serious pushback about, I got real pushback about that. And that's the other thing I've noticed about podcasting in general. There was this, for a long time, when we first started doing it, there was this almost Puritan approach to podcasting. And people should say you should never make money at doing podcasting. But then I stopped and said, that's ridiculous. Because, yes, the cost, and that's another reason why we're seeing yet another renaissance, the cost of equipment has come down immeasurably.
God, yes. I remember I had to buy a mixer, and so like under 200 euros, $250. You couldn't get anything half decent.
No, you couldn't.
No one would dare. I can't record my podcast with the €10 mic. I mean, that's just
you can use your phone. Thing. You can use your phone to create a podcast, right? I mean,
It still makes me shudder in the inside, Mike.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, the thing is, there's a lot of this. But back then, the equipment was very expensive, and people come into my office and they see all the equipment.
But that would justify it even more, which is kind of the paradox.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, people come into my office and they look and they see all the equipment I have and they're like, wow. And I go, a lot of this is because I write books about podcasting, social media, and things like that. I get stuff for free, but there's a strategy behind for free. Like right now, like this mic right here that I have. I know this doesn't work on the podcast, but the mic that I'm currently using, the mic stand, the adapter, and the actual microphone itself, this whole setup would cost you $250. I got it for free because I gave these people a lot of ink and photographs of their setup in Podcasting for Dummies. That's how.
Now we want to know. Okay, really. Now we want to know what gear you have, so we can link to it in the show notes. So if people want to go really, and actually, $250 for all that setup, that did not shock me. We've got more mic with the mic alone. Never mind.
No, I understand what you mean. Like I've got, and I mean, I'm looking at another thing I got from Blue Microphones, and it's called the Yeti Caster. I love
Blue Microphones.
And it's called the Yeti Caster. And it's got a Yeti. It's got a shock mount designed specifically for the Yeti, and a mount arm similar to this. And again, it's about $250-$300.
Do you want to tell us what mic it is?
The mic that I'm currently using is it's from the it's called the MXL Overcast.
By the way, have you seen the Rodecaster?
Oh,
that baby costs you really do? It costs about €550, and I've been staring at it for way longer than I care to admit.
And it's beautiful. And I'm sorry, it is not called. It's not the Overcaster. It's the MXL Overstream. Because it's being marketed not just to podcasters but also to streamers. And but this is and what you get with the Overstream bundle, that's what it's called. It's the MXL Overstream bundle. You look it up, you'll see it, and you find it under mxlmics.com. But with it, you get the mic arm. There's an MXL mic mate, which makes it into a which turns your XLR into a USB mic, and then there's the microphone itself, which is an MXL 990. But you can order the Overstream bundle in either Blizzard or Blaze. Blaze, you get the red light. Blizzard, you get a blue light. And it is a fantastic setup. But again, I get these things because I give them ink. If anyone were to say, I want a free Overstream bundle, MXL is going to be like, not going to happen. What's in it for us? It's business. It is a business. And so while there are authors that swear by giving it away, we did an entire show about this, me and about how when we started off, we thought giving it away was one of the best ways of doing it. But then we started to notice an entitlement with some people, especially online, where they were just expecting it's got to be for free. If it's online, it's for free. And so many people, from a legal standpoint, I'm sure you all know, from a legal standpoint, that is just a minefield to know.
Absolutely. But I think, I think a lot of these things started off with people giving it for free. They could get traction. And for a lot of people, it was the end goal to live, for example, live off their writing, live off of their podcasting, live off the craft. But if that's not the case, but we all started off at some point with pure passion. I've never had to think, I need to give up law and become a writer. But I always needed to write, so this is an eternal balancing act, I think. I've run out of questions, and I'm going to hand over to Michael, and I know that we've got tons of things more to talk about with T, so we'll have to invite him back. But now that's me with my list, and
Thank you, Beth.
Michael.
Thank you, Beth.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I've so far got one last question, which is Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek or Star Wars? Right. Let me think about that for a second. I know, man, it's so hard. Because it's fun. It's funny you should mention Star Wars.
And this is where we quickly cut and put the discussion between Michael and T about all kinds of science fiction-y stuff at the end of the podcast. So if you still want to listen to them rambling on about something, skip to the end. And now back to the outro.
Back to topic. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Had it coming.
It's had it coming, yeah. But I think we can wrap up here then, because this was my last question, and I think I also can speak for Kat if I say T, Mr. T. Thank you very much for coming to our podcast. It was very interesting, and well, I learned a lot about podcasting, and maybe I even can help Kat one day in editing our stuff, but well, maybe not too soon.
I can recommend a book that'll help you out.
And,
I promise.
well,
I can recommend a book that'll help you out with editing.
I might or might not have given it to him as a present already, but I'm sure he'll have to get the newest edition himself.
Yeah. I actually have it in my law firm.
There you go.
I look at it straight when I look over my desk.
Well, the new edition of Podcasting for Dummies will be out in October of this year.
Oh, super.
And the new edition of Social Media for Writers, that just released this week at the time of this recording.
So by the time this is published, it'll be out. And
yeah, it's available in both print and ebook. Yeah, you can find all my books if you go to tmorris.com. You'll see links to all of my social links, as well as links to my shop where you can get autographed copies of the book. Yes, we do we do ship internationally, but I'm just going to say straight up, you pay for it. So that's because it's coming from the United States, and that's just the way it goes. But they get signed.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe I finally should get the newest version signed this time. That's about time.
It's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah, there's my Christmas present.
That was subtle. That was very subtle, Kat. Very subtle.
I know.
Leave that in. You got to leave that moment in. That's a brilliant moment right there.
Well, I was more thinking so she gets kind of inaugurated as a lawyer on the 22nd of September. So how fast do you ship?
It's media mail. Sorry. Yeah, we're trying to keep it affordable for everybody. But thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. Good night.
Ciao. Good night.
Because right now I am very much deep into the camp of Team Boyega. I find it a little heartbreaking that the first of the new trilogy leaned very heavily into the fact that John Boyega, a person of color, was the principal character in this new ensemble of players. And then once they got that opening salvo with The Force Awakens, he got sidelined. He got sidelined hard, and he's been pretty vocal about it, and I think he should be, because I've been a fan of Boyega since Attack the Block, which was a British sci-fi film that is really under the radar, and if you have never seen it, I highly recommend you do. It's called Attack the Block. And Boyega is...
Okay, I definitely will.
It's an amazing piece. That being said, Boyega... I think Boyega has a right to be angry at the writers behind Star Wars, but not so much J.J. Abrams, because Boyega's character at least got back into the swing of things in The Rise of Skywalker. I really think where he fell off the rail... Not he, Boyega, but he, the character of Finn, where he fell off the rails was in The Last Jedi. I just think that Rian Johnson is a fantastic director, terrific writer, but he had no business making a Star Wars film. He had no business whatsoever making a Star Wars film. When Finn made his entrance in The Last Jedi, stumbling through with all the goop coming out of his stasis suit, my first thought was, are you kidding me? I just knew this was not going to end well, and I felt like they were struggling to. They basically just took Boyega and they made him a footnote, and I really was upset that they did that with Finn's character, because the first movie leaned so heavily into the marketing of, hey, look at this, it's not only a stormtrooper story, but it's a stormtrooper that's black. Woo! And man, that really kicked off the movie. But then they, and I really feel like that what happened with J.J. Abrams is what happened with Bryan Singer in the X-Men films. First two X-Men films, he was, hands on the wheel. He was involved, great, and then he took his hands off the wheel, produced the third film, which we don't talk about, and that's because he wanted to make a Superman movie with Brandon Routh, and we got two mediocre films instead of a great X-Men film. And I really feel like we had two really good Star Wars films, but then we had Rian Johnson's smelling piece of poo in the middle. And I think that really took Boyega's character of Finn. It took his entire story arc, just completely threw it off the rails. And so I mean, Star Wars is kind of a touchy subject with me right now, because I loved The Rise of Skywalker, but the amount of retconning that they had to do to make the story work, I thought was a bit ridiculous. So if you want to know, so if you ask me if the question is Star Trek or Star Wars, I'm going to double,
or any other genre or any other world of science fiction.
I'm going to double down and say The Boys.
If you like.
The Boys.
Man, The Boys. Carl Urban.
Love Carl Urban. I freaking love The Boys. I read the graphic novel and I'm like, yikes, this is misogyny heaven right here. And the fact that they got such a good series from such a dicey source material, I love the concept though. The fact that we've got superheroes behaving badly, I love that. I love the fact that there is a very thin line between controlling the superheroes and just keeping them in check through this whole process. I really love The Boys, and if I could have a second close second, which I'm also looking forward to season 2 of. I'm really looking forward to season 2 of The Witcher. As good as Henry Cavill. Oh yeah, as good as Henry Cavill is as Superman. I think he is an exceptional Superman. He was only in one good movie, unfortunately. But as good as Henry Cavill was as Superman, I think he's better as Geralt of Riviera. I mean, he is so damn good in The Witcher. He is so damn good, and he's so big. He's so big. There's a scene where he's lying back like this, and his bicep is bumping into his ear, and I'm like, for frank's sake, man, how big did you make yourself? But I admire that. I admire that kind of dedication. So yeah, so those are my answers.
Okay.
The Boys and The Witcher.
Okay. Full disclosure, I have yet to watch The Witcher, but I've also kind of binge watched the first season of The Boys, and I'm a great fan of Carl Urban because I loved him in as the McCoy, the new McCoy in the new Star Trek movies, and I really loved him in the new Dread movie because what he did alone with his chin, leaving the helmet on the whole time, and doing spot on what I think of Judge Dredd. It's straight out the comics.
The way I just describe it to two people is that the way I describe the two Dredd films is this way. When you hear Stallone say, "I am the law," you have to laugh because it's just ridiculous. And it's kind of a train wreck. When Carl Urban says it, when he went, "I am the law," I nearly pooped my pants. I mean, it had all the intensity that I wanted in the original Judge Dredd. So Dredd is one of those movies that I go back to just to watch. It's like my new Die Hard. I love watching it. It's just a great watch. It really is.
Danke, dass ihr beim Nerds of Law Podcast zugehört habt. Auf unserer Webseite nerdsoflaw.com könnt ihr das Impressum, Datenschutzinformationen und viele spannendere Dinge finden. Dieser Podcast ist durch eine Creative Commons by Non-Commercial 4.0 International License geschützt. Das bedeutet, ihr dürft den Podcast kopieren, mit Freunden teilen, mit der Information, wo der Podcast herkommt und ihn nicht für kommerzielle Zwecke verwenden. Das Urheberrecht für die Musik liegt bei Mick Bourdain. Ihr findet seine Webseite unter mickbourdain.com. Live long and prosper. Eure Nerds of Law.